You ready for a shock, guys?
Go on, Steve.
If you thought the dismissal of Danny Cowley was interesting, I'm just going to read you an email that this second has come in from our reporter Simon Stone. BBC Sport understands Watford have decided to replace manager Nigel Pearson for the final 2 games of the season. They're yet to confirm the decision, but it's thought the club feel it was necessary after Friday's 3-1 defeat at West Ham left them hanging on to their Premier League status by a thread. How about that?
Wow. I mean, Steve, I was there on Friday night, and they lost the game in the first 10 minutes, and they've not been great, you know, since lockdown, but they got those crucial home wins against Norwich and Newcastle, and that's now going to be a 4th manager this season. And what sort of impact, Steve, can a manager have with those, and the 2 games they've got as well, Manchester City and Arsenal?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 games to go. You've not got a figurehead at the club that's going to lead in direction. It's just strange timing with that. I mean, you look at Nigel Pearson and the teams that are down there with, obviously at that time with West Ham and Aston Villa, you're thinking if there's ever a team and a staff that's going to embody what it takes to get out, it's going to be someone under Nigel Pearson and Troy Deeney, them sort of characters. But the time of this, I mean, to go into these last 2 games needing 2 results and then there's no responsibility.
And Steve, it's not as if the players have down tools and not been playing for him, because they came out in the second half on Friday night, got back into the game and were putting everything into it. So that baffles me, Steve. That really does.
Nothing surprises us in football, does it? But you know, they're the Cowley brothers, and now this. But with Watford, it's just strange timing. Really strange. You're going to these 2 important games now at the end of the season with some knowledge and tactics, and you know, roll your sleeves up, give it what you got to give. But who's going to be leading the line?
Actually, Steve, the point I would make as well is they might actually not need another point, you know.
Yeah.
Because they've got the points in the bag. They could lose both of those games, and actually Bournemouth and Villa still not be able to do anything about it. But I just think it is amazing that with the 2 games they've got coming, and you know, thinking that you might have to take something from them, that you would make that decision about that manager at this time. That is remarkable.
I mean, Steve Sidwell, I suspect you haven't played for a team that have had 4 managers in a single season, but to change now, and especially change from a manager who, when he took over, you were in the relegation zone, and you're now not in the relegation zone. What does that do to the squad?
Well, I mean, you say 4 managers in one season. The year that Fulham went down, we had 3 managers, and it is very hard because you're chopping and changing tactics from one philosophy to the other, and then towards the end, it's all about, look, just go out there, give 100%. Tactics go out the window, really, and that's what happened with Nigel Pearson. I spoke to a few of the players and a few of the staff that was there, and they said it was a breath of fresh air when him and Shakespeare come in and sort of down the tactics and just said, look, you know, the one thing that's going to get us out of this is 100% effort, taking our chances and being committed. If we're not any of that or the above, then we've got no chance. And you know, for now to lose that for the last 2 games, I mean, it's a very brave call. Again, it's the decision and the direction what Watford want to go into, but again, nothing surprises me in football. Really strange.
Wow, huge news.
Steve,
yeah, go on, Ali.
Have they said, I mean, in terms of who's doing the last 2 games? Do we know?
Don't know yet.
Troy Deeney?
No, nobody knows.
No.
Could be Craig Shakespeare, couldn't it? But we don't know.
Yeah.
Baffling, absolutely baffling. Well, we'll bring you more, and we will continue to react to this for sure. Ali, Steve, thank you very much for the time being. Let's bring in Pat Murphy now, who's at Pride Park, but I'm sure you're very interested in this news as well, because you know Nigel Pearson well, don't you?
Indeed, and if there's one thing that Nigel Pearson would have given Watford when he was appointed in December last year, and I thought it was a great appointment, I remember saying so on Sport on 5, it's experience. We all know what he did at Leicester, the Great Escape in 2015. Remarkable achievement, turning it round, and the avoided relegation. And that team and his signings were the foundation of Ranieri's title win the following year. Never forget what Nigel Pearson did for that Leicester side in winning the title in 2016. But cast your mind back to West Brom in 2005. Brian Robson, the manager, Pearson, the assistant. They were dead and buried. They were bottom of the table at Christmas time, and they turned it round, and the Great Escape also happened then. Pearson was at the heart of that. Strong, imperturbable, tactically very sound, honest and open with the players. He was a tremendous assistant to Brian Robson, and Pearson has never been relegated. It is absolutely ridiculous that he's gone now, because he brings so much to the table at, dare I say it, squeaky bum time. Now, the Pozzo family have always added to the gaiety of the nation, really, unless you're a Watford supporter, because they do make some idiosyncratic decisions at Watford. But I think that is a remarkable decision, not least of all because of the kind of manager that Nigel Pearson is, and the kind of assistant that Craig Shakespeare is, and what they can bring a beleaguered side in such a situation because of their massive experience.
Against Leicester, full commentary from the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. That's where we find our commentator, Conor McNamara. We're going to have to talk about Nigel Pearson first, though. What's your immediate thoughts?
Hey, Steve, how you doing? Yeah, you know what I was thinking with this? I was listening to Alistair and Steve there talking, and obviously making a lot of sense, saying this is baffling and it doesn't make sense. And I think in football, when things are baffling, they don't make sense. It's because we don't know all the details. You look at the history of Nigel Pearson, that this smacks to me that there must have been a fallout behind the scene. I don't think that there's a logical football reason, given the two recent wins that they've had, winning 2 of the last 3 games. It doesn't make sense to sack him for footballing reasons. And then you look at the history, and, you know, do you remember when he had the ostrich rant with the journalist, asking him, was he an ostrich with Ian Baker, wasn't it, back in his Leicester days? I remember Nigel Pearson confronting James MacArthur, the wicket player, holding him down on the ground, hands in his neck. You know, he's a guy who, let's be face it, and he had great success in so many jobs. But, you know, he can lose his cool. And you just think, in this scenario, tempers frayed, a lot at stake, end of the season, there's been a row surely in the back of the scenes here, and that's what's led to the departure. That would be my take anyway.
In the FA Cup semi-final between Chelsea and Manchester United, where your commentary team will be Chris Sutton with our correspondent John Murray. Good afternoon, chaps.
Good afternoon, Steve. How are we?
Good. How's
Eventful
Wembley looking
afternoon
today?
so far?
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah, I thought it was going to be really simple. Thought it was going to be really quiet, and then Danny Cowley was sacked. And then, well, I'd have to say that the line about Nigel Pearson, our understanding, Watford are set to sack Nigel Pearson. We're waiting for that official confirmation. But, yeah, what's your take?
Yes, I mean, I've just clicked on the Watford website, and there's no confirmation on there yet. But as you say, you're absolutely correct. Our colleague Simon Stone has given us the steer that this will happen. It was initially reported by the Daily Telegraph this afternoon, and we understand the club feel the decision is necessary after Friday's 3-1 defeat at West Ham. If you remember, they were 3-0 down Watford after just a half an hour in that match, and so the bottom of the table with Watford, 34 points, 2 to play, and they've got to play against Manchester City at home and Arsenal away. We know that Bournemouth have lost this afternoon, 31 points with 1 match to play, and Aston Villa 31 points with 2 to play. But yes, it's very much the talking point here, and even by Watford's standards, I mean, it's 13 managers in the last decade, but even by their standards, this comes as a big surprise.
Head scratcher, Chris?
Yes, very, very much so. Did John just say that the decision was necessary? They've won 2 out of the last 3 games. They've just beaten Norwich and Newcastle. So if that's necessary, that's extremely harsh. Obviously, we're speculating, but we don't know what conversations have gone on. What I would say is most people would look at this situation and think that if the story which I've seen, that they're going to put Hayden Mullins and Graham Stack in charge for the last 2 games when they are so crucial. Hayden Mullins has been a caretaker manager there for a couple of games before, but that would be a very, very strange decision, but we don't know what has gone on.
I mean, as a player, can you put yourself in that dressing room? What sort of reaction can you really get when the manager goes, if the manager goes, who's taken you from the relegation zone out of the relegation zone?
Well, the players will be stunned by this. You know, I'm absolutely sure of this. I mean, you know, again, we're speculating, but there must have been, you know, huge differences, because the sensible thing to do probably would be to have the conversation. Let's get to the end of the season if there's any grievances, and then we can decide what to do. Let's stay in the Premier League, and then we can go from there. That hasn't been the case. So as a player, I mean, it's all up in the air. But I suppose as a Watford player today, you're feeling pretty happy seeing the Bournemouth result from earlier. So, you know, it's still in their hands. They're in a decent position. in terms of having the opportunity to stay in the Premier League. Having said all that, there's absolute mayhem, isn't it, though?
He's been in charge for 20 matches, Nigel Pearson, and I mean, you and I were talking, Chris, weren't we, about the stability.
Yeah.
And, we spoke about that in the opening, weeks that he was in charge, to say that, that he'd provided the steady hand on the tiller. And yet now, for whatever reason, it's felt that a change is needed to be made again for these final 2 matches.
And, of course, we'll bring you the official confirmation if and when it comes.
BBC Sports' Simon Stone is with us. Any closer to knowing why this has happened?
Well, why it's happened is fairly simple. I think Watford's, the owner, Gino Pozzo, fears that with Nigel Pearson in charge, the club wouldn't have got the necessary point or victory that they need to save themselves, and he thinks they've got more of a chance now Hayden Mullins is in charge. I think there's no more to it than that, really.
Okay, let's bring in a Watford fan before we get more from Simon and from Ian Dennis and Mark Lawrence and Mike Parkins from the Rookery End podcast. Evening, Mike.
Hello, Mark. Brighton Newcastle, a game with nothing on it. That sounds like heaven to me.
Yeah, I know. What you would give for that, hey? Do you think you're more likely to get a point with Hayden Mullins in charge than Nigel Pearson?
Very difficult to say. I mean, what I can say with certainty is that Watford's form since the return to football kicked off again has been very, very poor, Mark. And we've had 7 games, and the first half of each of those 7 games has followed the same pattern, which is a really, really bad performance from Watford. And you don't expect that from a team who should be fighting for their Premier League survival. It's important to say that Nigel Pearson has done well to get Watford to this stage. Of course, they were cut adrift at Christmas before he arrived. But the form since lockdown has been hugely concerning, and dropping out of the Premier League would be hugely concerning for us as supporters and, of course, the hierarchy at the club. So it's a massive gamble, but one they've obviously felt they've had to take.
Because you look at the form table, and this has been quoted a lot, look at the form table since he took over, and those 20 games, Watford are in 12th from during Nigel Pearson's reign. To play devil's advocate and back you up slightly there, a lot of that happened pre-lockdown, and most of those points came pre-lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big result for Watford and well, neutrals as well was beating Liverpool. But the fact that was followed up with a really lacklustre performance against Crystal Palace before lockdown, and almost if Watford had won that game at Palace, they could have put the season to bed, I think. And that form has continued post lockdown, and that's a huge concern. Like I mentioned, this should be a team absolutely fighting out of their skin, and that just hasn't been evident at all. And it's obviously rang alarm bells at the highest level at the club.
Do you have any problem with the number of managers Watford go through?
It's exhausting, Mark. Yeah. Obviously, we'd like a bit of stability, but on the flip side, the Pozzo family took Watford over when they were in absolute dire straits, up against it financially and on the pitch, struggling in the Championship, and now here we are, having enjoyed this year is pushing it a little bit, but experienced 5 years in the Premier League. So where we've come from to where we are today is an extraordinary journey that shouldn't be overlooked, and they have their way of doing it. And it's worked so far. The big issue this year is that the setup at Watford is clear. The head coach manages on-field stuff, and the director of football and the other guys manage the transfers. Now, so they've brought the players in, and 3 head coaches haven't been able to get a tune out of them consistently. So is the issue with the players that have been brought in or the head coach? And I think now, for the first time, Watford supporters are starting to look upwards at whether those guys are actually doing the job properly.
I'm just going to bring Ian Dennis in at Bramall Lane, because you will know from listening to interviews with Watford players, and admittedly, quite a lot of those interviews have been with either Troy Deeney or Ben Foster, but they have talked about the honesty and the clarity and the simplicity that Nigel Pearson brought in. So you sense that, I mean, I don't know, because I haven't heard anything since Nigel Pearson has gone from the players, but you sense that the players have been with him.
Yes, I think there's been a lot on social media about something untoward happening and scuffles. From what I can gather, that's absolute nonsense. Probably at half-time, Nigel Pearson would have reminded the players of their responsibilities. But, as has already been mentioned, they have been abject in the 7 games in the first half, and I'm told particularly the one against Southampton. So that's been a worrying trend since restart, and as to why that is the case, not having a crowd, but that's the same for everybody. So that is troubling, and the timing of the decision is an odd one, with 2 games to go, but it's done purely on the basis to try and spark a reaction with these 2 games to try and preserve their top flight status. At this stage, they don't have a candidate in mind to who's going to replace Nigel Pearson. But I would imagine that whenever they do start to canvass that opinion, there will still be interest, regardless of what people think about Watford's hire and fire policy.
How many managers have they had, Deno, this season?
3.
End of. 3 managers, 3 different voices. And it sounds like a head of recruitment who can't recruit. There's only one option, isn't there?
I don't know whether...
Go on, sorry, Ian.
I don't know whether there was a degree of complacency from the players at the start of this season. When you think that, last year they did ever so well with the FA Cup, but then the decision with Quique Sanchez Flores didn't work out, did it? Going back to him, and now they're left in this situation. Although Nigel Pearson did do a good job to try to give them this fighting chance, but just since restart, and I think that's the one thing. In the first half of games, they just haven't performed, and that in itself is troubling.
If you just go back to Mike Parkin from the Rookery M podcast, if you want to spark a reaction, would you not have been better off doing this before the West Ham game to try and get a reaction? Where if you got a reaction, you're more than likely to maybe get something out of that game. I mean, even if you get a reaction against Manchester City and Arsenal, you would envisage it's going to be hard to pick up a point against either of them.
Yeah, potentially. I think they probably would have been of the view that the West Ham game was a winnable one, and if Nigel Pearson has performed well for Watford in other big games, why can't he do it on this one? So I think it probably would have been more shocking if they'd have got rid of him before West Ham, because we've had that game circled in red for a long time on the calendar as one that could make or break the season. So I think to disrupt the whatever sort of flow there was before that would have been a big surprise. But as you mentioned, now it's down to the players. I think we heard from Hayden Mullins there. I think he does have the respect of the players. Him and Graham Stack have been in and around the club for a long time now, and they will have earned the respect of those players day in, day out on the training ground. It's now up to those guys to dig themselves out of a massive hole, because none of them should want an R next to their name on their CV. Some of them will be looking to move away from Watford next year. Abdoulaye Doucouré is probably the biggest name that might be looking for a move, but he's going to find it hard if he is part of a relegated Watford side. And I think it's now down to those guys to get together in the training ground and at the training ground and find some leaders amongst them. You mentioned Troy Deeney, you mentioned Ben Foster. They're both good talkers, good guys, but it needs more than just those two to stand up and be counted, because it hasn't happened enough. And I think the players have to take some responsibility starting this week.
We'll let you go, Mike, and leave you to watch Brighton Newcastle with jealous thoughts. Thank you very much. Mike Parkin from the Rookery M podcast. Simon Stone, Ian said, they don't. His understanding is nobody is lined up to replace Pearson as yet.
Yeah, that's right. I think Ian's exactly right, and I think he's also right that the form since lockdown is what's triggered it. I mean, the simple fact is that if Manchester City beat Watford by 3 goals tomorrow and Aston Villa beat Arsenal, Watford will be in the bottom 3 on goal difference. And just to focus minds a little bit, the last 7 games against Manchester City, Watford have lost a lot and they've conceded 33 goals. The last 2 games they played were the FA Cup final when they lost 6-0, and this season at the Etihad they lost 8-0. I think it's almost as crucial that they don't get absolutely walloped tomorrow as it is that they get a point. And I think that is something that is focusing minds at Watford.